Hello, everyone. My name is Joanne Lockwood, and I'm your host for the Inclusion Bites podcast. In this series, I have interviewed a number of amazing people and simply had a conversation around the subject of inclusion, belonging, and generally making the world a better place for everyone to thrive. If you'd like to join me in the future, then please do drop me a line to joe.lockwood@teachchangehappen.co.uk. That's SWE changehappen.co.uk. You can catch up with all of the previous shows on iTunes, Spotify, and the usual places. So plug in your headphones, grab a decaf, and let's get going. Today is episode 76 with the title Awakening Dreams. And I have the absolute honour and privilege to welcome my guest today, Ian Hatton. Ian describes himself as someone who builds conscious leaders. And when I asked Ian to describe his superpower, he said, radical self-acceptance of his flaws that enables him to radically accept others, no matter what. Hello, Ian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Joe. It's so good to be here. I've been looking forward to this since we met in October.
Yes, we did. In Dublin, wasn't it? At a global speakers
Dublin,
summit.
indeed.
Yeah. Yes, It was a brilliant day. Ian, tell me, Awakening Dreams, what's that about?
So, Joe, it's a bit of a long story, but it goes back more than 20 years where some friends and I got together and we said, who are we sort of mythically and mystically, just as a way of discovering more of our own uniqueness. And various of my friends came up with all sorts of ideas. And I came back and said, I'm blank. I'm stumped. I'm coming up with nothing. And one of my friends looked up and she said, but Ian, it's obvious you're Morpheus. And I said, what do you mean I'm Morpheus? I wish I was Morpheus. And everybody else turned and said, you are Morpheus. And the one who awakens dreams, the Greek god of dreams, the one who believes when everybody else has stopped believing, the one, not the hero, but the one who raises up the hero. And I came to identify with myself as Morpheus. And I am one who awakens dreams in others, leadership dreams to influence and leave the world a better place.
I love that. The just picked up what you said, that the creator of heroes, the unsung, is the tennis coach of the greats, if you like, the leadership coach of the greats. It's too often we find that the guru wants the limelight, but what you're saying there is you are the supporter, you are the promoter, you are the person that gets the person to their dreams. It's not about, and your dream is to get them to their dream, if you like.
Exactly. That is exactly what it's about. And nothing gives me a greater thrill. And I don't mind the limelight. I don't mind being on stage, giving keynote speeches and all the rest of it. But my real success is 20 years later, what are they saying? And I've got two examples of young people in South Africa. Well, they were young 20 years ago, who I met and spent a lot of time with, and who now are running in either senior leadership positions or own their own businesses very successfully. And that to me is the real glory I want, is what they do, not what I do.
Oh, wow. I'd love to see that replicated in other leadership development, because yes, I appreciate you want the limelight, you want the glory, you want more business coming in. Obviously, we all do, but I think as speakers, we often recognise it's not about us, is it? It's about the audience. It's about the people we're inspiring, and it really helps to ground us in that.
Joanne, one of the most humbling lessons I've ever learned was somebody once said to me, quite a good orator said to me, eloquence is in the audience. And I was like, no, I'm the eloquent. It's in me. And eventually I came to realize that the audience drew it out from me, and that the audience was what was the missing ingredient between me being eloquent or not. And that is, it's all about the audience. It's not about me at all.
So when we were talking before we went live, you were talking about conscious leadership. So what's that consciousness? I presume there must be an unconscious leadership or a lack of consciousness leadership. So what do you mean by conscious leadership?
Well, it's a very all-encompassing term. And when I left the computer industry just over 20 years ago to follow this new career, my second career, I was very excited about a concept I'd learned about called authentic leadership, where people bring their truest selves and they lead from that. But that's evolved, and the term conscious leadership has only emerged since about 2016. So it's a fairly new idea, but it builds on this idea of authentic leadership. So conscious leaders are conscious of themselves, and that means everything: personality, strengths, weaknesses, intuitions. It's not just head, it's heart as well, body even. We're not just brains on sticks. There's a whole lot of stuff about being aware of the fullness of who we are. But simultaneously, the same for their people. Their consciousness of self becomes a consciousness of other, and looking at the diversity there and the different strengths and weaknesses and preferences and wirings and all of these things. And again, it's mental, it's physical, it's heart, it's intuition, it's all these things. And then perhaps even beyond, being aware of our planet and consciousness, of the ecological things that are happening and that sort of thing. So it includes this full variety, and a conscious leader is somebody who leads with all conscious in all of those areas.
Yeah, picking up on what you're saying, I was talking about this the other night with somebody, and it's down to some of it is down to your personal brand. And we talk about a marketing term, and it's who you are, what you stand for, and what people can expect from you. And that's our brand, isn't it? We wherever you want to boil that down. And I was talking to someone the other day about we have to now factor in to our brand our planetary considerations, our
Yes.
environmental, our sustainability, our impact on the planet has to be part of our personal brand as well, because we know that our brand either turns people on or turns people off. So if we're gas guzzling, polluting brand, we know that's going to have an impact on our clients, our audience, whoever that may be.
That is totally true. And again, one example is that I've got 12 leaders on a 1-year journey with me. And one of them I met with earlier this week. And I was asking him, so what do you want to shift at the next year? What lies ahead for you? What is the next step in you and your leadership? And it took a little while, and eventually he said, you know what? This is the year that he wants to establish his personal brand. And it's exactly this. It's all encompassing. It's drawing on his strengths, being aware and releasing his weaknesses, teaming for weakness, and being conscious of that. And the same with his people and his impact on the planet. He's very, very interested in the African context in agriculture and how agriculture impacts things. And it's all of that he wants to include in his personal brand story.
Yeah. Gen Z, the emerging generations that are our future leaders, you're probably even seeing some early Gen Z leaders already.
Yes.
That is really, really important. And certainly when we look at Gen Z's follower, the Gen Beta or Gen Alpha, we will see more of this consciousness around, consciousness about identity, conscious about who they are, consciousness about their environment and how they want to be treated and respected is completely different to I'm a Gen Xer, millennials or boomers. We have a different view of the world, don't we? And it's going to be really important.
And you know what else, linked with that, you said, well, if they're conscious leaders, are there also unconscious leaders? And the people who are going to struggle the most with these new generations coming through is the ones who are leading unconsciously, because they really will struggle. And what we're finding is conscious leadership is very appealing to the new leaders coming through and the new workforce coming through. And so this idea of conscious leadership is critical. And we are already seeing the first Gen Z or Gen Z leaders coming through, and they absolutely have an awareness that we haven't seen previously. And I'm often working with some older generation, even baby boomer leaders, and they're going, "Oh, they don't know how to handle these people," and they start complaining about all the Gen Zs. And then I say, have you thought of flipping it around and thinking of the advantages that they bring? And we start listing them, and their jaws drop open when they realize how unconscious they've been to the incredible strengths and identity and diversity and awareness that the new generations bring.
Yeah, the way they communicate, the way they collaborate, they're more collaborative, I believe. Just in terms of,
Definitely more collaborative, yes.
more micro interactions, more asynchronous communication.
Yeah,
They don't. There's a lot more trust, maybe as well. I think we go back to my generation and older. It's very much command and control, isn't it? It's very much, if I can't see you, I can't trust you.
yeah.
I need status reports. I need updates all the time. I need to know what you're doing. We're not seeing that in the newer leaders, are we?
No, much more awareness, trust. And in fact, what we're seeing is that so much where the old style leadership tries to clamp down, it breaks trust and it slows everything down. So there's advantages in this high trust environment that is this more inclusive environment where things can speed up. So what you'll find is in low trust environments, leaders are creating this sort of clamp down space, as you said, command and control. And the command and control space means people spend time off task. They are now doing the, covering my rear end activities as opposed to the actual task.
It's all the
So it's
reporting, it's
inefficient.
all this, there's layers and layers and layers, and and I don't know about you, but I'm a big fan of Trello and some of these new tools where I'm not saying I'm an agile scrum master or agile project manager myself, but I like the idea of having these sprints, these little activities. We're not big monolithic projects where we get to the end, look over our shoulder and go, "Oh, we've missed something." It's collaborative all the way through, isn't it now? And that's a nightmare for some, but I think modern ways of working are much more about touch points, keeping in touch, toolbox talks or start a day scrum type things. How are we doing this week? What are our problems? What are our challenges? Let's get on with it then.
Exactly. Exactly that. And the new tools are coming through. I was working with some leaders recently in a big global company, and I was saying, so, how competent are you with the new tools? And they will, they still rely on email. And I'm saying, well, email's not a collaboration tool. And they were in a state of shock. And I'm going, well, there's so many collaboration tools out there. Email is is based on the Memo in, Memo out, which was more than 100 years old. These days we're looking to collaborate, but we want to do it virtually. So can you master these tools? And they realized that some of their biggest gaps in their leadership is they were blind to the tools that were available and the mastery required to be able to collaborate in that way.
So let me ask you a kind of I think I know your answer to this. Are leaders born or are they bred?
My answer is yes. And what I mean by that is that not everybody's going to be a Mahatma Gandhi or a Nelson Mandela or a Martin Luther King Jr. or a Mother Teresa or whoever you want to use as an example, because I think there is an element of wiring for certain types of leadership. But if you then go back and let me just use those exact names I've just used, Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, and Mother Teresa, you'll find between them that there isn't one style of leadership. They're incredibly diverse in the way that they led, what they brought. And so for me, real leadership is discovering who you really are and bringing that to the influence that you want to bring on the world. And so there is this idea that I've never met a leader who wasn't born. But then again, I've never met a good one who wasn't also made. Look at Nelson Mandela's 27 years in prison. That made him in so many ways. And so when we look at the idea of yes, we need to be teachable. In fact, one of the most fatal flaws of leadership is to not be teachable. And so we do want to grow, but actually we all have the opportunity to lead, whether it is as a parent, you're a leader. If you're a teacher, you're a leader. If you're a friend or a consultant, or you're influencing, the moment you're influencing others, you are a leader. You might never become, the president of the United States, but those are not the only leaders in the world. Anybody who influences others is a leader.
And I always say that we are all inherently leaders. We have to lead ourselves. We have to set example, the social influence, all those kind of things. So yeah, I'm a great believer in that, and I completely agree that some people do have a kind of an innate personality trait that makes, whether it's their confidence or something that is not learned, it's just part of who they are. But the danger is, if we're not careful, we believe that certain people are better at leading, which again leads to biases and denial of opportunity for people who are not ticking those boxes. That maybe their voice isn't as powerful or as strong, therefore they have less authority when they speak, and those kind of styles. But as you just mentioned, Mother Teresa, she didn't have a loud, authoritative stance or voice, yet she still influenced many millions.
Exactly. And this idea of bringing your unique self, to me, is so central to it. So one of the things I've had before is I've had people come up to me during training when I'm showing them a particular leadership technique. In other words, the part of being made as a leader. And I've had them come to me and say, no, but surely we should just reject all of this, and I should just try and be more like Steve Jobs. And then I go and I say, okay, fine. Have you heard Steve Jobs' commencement speech? Because his commencement speech says, if you want to have your biggest impact on the world, you need to be your unique self. In other words, Steve Jobs himself said, don't be like me. And so, yes, we can learn techniques from others, but there is something about our unique impact on the world is going to be based on the full diversity of uniqueness that is within us.
Yeah, and you can't suddenly start shouting and screaming at people for, as Steve Jobs often did,
Yes.
without building up your credentials as a leader to have that level of respect. You can't just suddenly think, "Oh, I want to be Steve Jobs," and act like him and get away with it. So yeah, not everyone can lead the
There are
world
many
like
very,
Donald
very
Trump.
successful leaders who never shouted and screamed at anybody.
Yeah, exactly, and different styles. And yeah, we see it. We're seeing it now with. I won't mention the person's name, but yeah, Twitter and Tesla
Yes.
and SpaceX. So that style of leadership again is different, but there's a neurodiversity in there as well. So we got to remember that not everybody is neurotypical, whatever that means to people, and people have different approaches where empathy and compassion, or even logical, clear thinking, isn't a factor in everybody's leadership style.
Exactly.
So how do you build the marriage between authenticity and consciousness? Because for me, when we think about say EQ, emotional intelligence, part of that is about self-awareness and then self-regulation. If you're self-regulating, do you lose some of your authenticity? If we're learning to be leaders and learning and adapting our style, what is the true self? Are we putting a mask on?
I love this question. It's actually one of my favorite questions, and it's brilliantly worded. Thank you. So, Joe, in this case, emotional intelligence does include a level of self-management, and that, to me, actually does align with consciousness. So if you take, for example, the person who has a really bad day at work and they arrive home and the dog does something, and the first thing they do is they kick the dog. That to me is not conscious leadership, because it wasn't the dog's fault that they had a bad day at work. Or conversely, I had a row with my partner this morning, and I arrive at work and I now take it out on my staff. It may be authentic, but it is not conscious and conscious leadership. But the idea for me of authentic is that I am self-examining. I'm self-aware. I am going to bring my unique personality, my genius. I'm very simultaneously aware that I have areas where I have debilitating weaknesses, or areas where I actually feel quite stupid. And so I want to be aware and authentic about all of that and say, I know where I need help, and let me get that help. Let me be vulnerable enough to get that help. Let me be transparent enough. And that is really what I mean by authentic. Authentic is not, I'm just going to vent and take out something that's there and bring it and project it over here. That to me is not conscious. And that's perhaps why I like the graduation from my thinking around authentic leadership towards conscious leadership, because it brings it's a better managed type of leadership, but it's still authentic.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I initially used the word in there, vulnerability. I'm a great believer that vulnerability, humility,
Yeah.
are core skills for great leaders in today's world.
Mm.
How do you get leaders to accept their vulnerability and humility?
It's a very tricky area that I work, and I don't think I've got one answer for that question, but we can talk about it from so many different facets and paint the picture. So, for example, if we're talking about trust, so many people say, "Oh, well, I don't know how important this trust is, and I just need to be myself," and this sort of thing. And what we've seen as the research is emerging from trust is that trust is, in some ways, the precursor and more important than engagement. Without trust, and the consequences of low trust are actually more extreme than the consequences of not having people fully engaged. And so you start talking about, so how do you build trust? And everybody kind of goes, oh, well, I've got integrity. And then you say, okay, do you have integrity with yourself? And now suddenly they're taken aback. What do you mean? I say, well, when you commit to something in your own life, do you always do it? Are you authentic with yourself? Are you able to build that authenticity with self? And then they kind of start to realize this is quite tricky now, and say, well, if you're saying, well, I always practice integrity with my people, but I don't have integrity with myself, where does that leave you? Are they not picking up on that lack of integrity with self? What do they think if you say, well, yes, I'm true to my word, and then they hear you lying to your partner, or even lying to yourself, and so there's this whole thing of a realization that there's a piece of vulnerability that if that's not in place, you cannot be trusted. And if you cannot be trusted, what's the impact on your leadership? And so it's sort of building the case, and trust is just one area that I work with that. I think there's so many others. Another one, probably one that's very intuitive and obvious to you, is that if you want people to open up, you start by opening up. There is nothing that will trigger others to open up quicker than you opening up. And so without vulnerability, are you going to really know what's going on with your people? Are you going to know what the real issues are? If there's a potential safety issue or quality issue, is anybody going to speak up? If you're not prepared to be vulnerable, will they be vulnerable? I work. My biggest principle of conscious leadership is it starts with self. In fact, my favorite saying for conscious leaders is, I am my number one job every day. I'm not my only job, but it starts with self-leadership and then goes external. You've got to be a little bit vulnerable to be able to do that.
So trust sort of feeds into one of the new buzzwords we're talking about, psychological safety, doesn't it? It's making sure that I can trust me with you. You won't break me.
Yes. And I think vulnerability is key to that, because if we are not vulnerable, how do people trust us? How do they know that it's actually safe?
Yeah, people want to be listened to. They want to be heard. They want to know they can speak up.
Yes.
And if they don't feel they've got a comfortable environment where they can do that, and then that's all parts of the life cycle, the recruitment phase, the employment phase, the growing phase, whatever it may be, you need to be able to have that confidence that you matter, and
Yes.
you will be heard. And that's often we find that people start with, "This is what I think. Do you agree with me?" type sentences. Not, hey team, we've got a challenge here. Who's got some ideas?
Right.
And it's about flipping the leaders there to coach and facilitate and to steer, not to direct, almost.
Well, one of the big skills there is this almost balance between candor and curiosity. You
Mm.
know, to come in and say, I think we have a problem with our clients. This the picture as I see it, and I'm basing that on this evidence. But I don't know if I'm seeing the whole picture. So I'd love to hear your opinion, you know. And so you're bringing in something quite direct, quite candid, but you're open to the possibility that you might be misinterpreting the data or not have all the data. And then you can get the discussion going, and others can sort of say, well, I'm not sure about this interpretation of that. I interpreted that this way. And so you get a much better quality conversation going around the issue.
Yeah, I think you're right there. Is starting off with that. What have I missed?
I love it.
Here's my perspective. What have I missed? Is kind of a good
Yes,
thing. I often talk
exactly.
about we spend a lot of our time disagreeing with outcomes, and I use the equation E plus R equals O: event, reaction, outcome. And
Yep.
we spend all of our life in O, talking about O's and outcomes, and that could be someone's belief system, whatever it may be. But we very rarely talk about the plus, which is the perspective of that event or that perspective of that situation. And I always try and encourage people, if we can start talking about perspectives, that's very interesting. Why do you think that? Oh, wow, I never thought of that. Tell me more about that. So we may not actually align in outcomes because we don't all vote for the same party. We have
Right.
different perspectives on who the best party is, but we can agree that I see why you lean right and I lean left, or you're centrist. So we can actually be very happy in each other's perspectives without having to agree with each other.
This is totally correct. You know, one of the things we talk about is functional conflict, and so dysfunctional conflict is when there's no conflict. That's dysfunctional. And dysfunctional conflict is when there's rage or war, you know. But somewhere in the middle, there is this functional conflict where I have my perspective, and then I'm really can hear your perspective, and we go, oh, we've been arguing my outcome or my solution versus your solution. But now that we're aware of both perspectives, maybe there's a better solution that meets both of them.
Hmm.
And that's only possible, and that's functional conflict. That is where the result of the conflict is better than either of the two proposed ideas.
Hmm. Yeah, I always say there's my idea, there's your idea, and there's the shared idea, the
Right.
other, the bigger idea, the joined idea.
But very often we can't get to that shared idea when we are just talking about the idea. When we talk
Hmm.
about what's driving our ideas, what's my perspective, what's my evidence, what am I basing it on, then we can sort of go, oh, but if we did this, it actually addresses both. And
Hmm.
that's the key.
I'm going to wind both our memories back to Dublin, the conference we were both at. And one thing that I still take away from that was the speaker Joe Berry, who was father was killed by the IRA, the British IRA, back in 1970 or early 80s, whenever it was, and how she sat down with the terrorists of the organizations who murdered her father.
It was
And
shocking, yes.
yeah, and the thing I loved about it was the way she resolved that in her mind was, we have to find a shared goal. What do we both want to achieve? And in her particular case, you've got to move past the argument or the fact that someone's killed your father and move to we want to end conflict as being the shared goal. And if you can paint a shared goal, then you can both have that vision and work towards it. And then you acknowledge what happened in the past, but you move on from it because what's important is the future and the shared goal.
Exactly. And it was such a shocking story, but at the same time gave such hope in
Mm.
in in restoring and rebuilding and creating a better future.
Yeah. It does take people to get to the mindset whereas I don't have to be right. I don't have to win. It's not about me winning. It's about we win. We all succeed, isn't it? That's
You know, Joe, I would venture that one of the number one problems I work with leaders is on the need to be right. This is, I've seen this across South Africa. I've seen this across Africa. I've seen it in the Middle East. And I've seen it even with a lot of leaders that I've worked with in Europe, more than 80 countries now, leaders I've worked with. And the fascinating thing is there's this obsession, and I think it's based on insecurity, which is why, for me, consciousness is so vital. This obsession with needing to be right, needing to win arguments. And you could win those battles, but you will lose the war. You'll lose the war of trust. You'll lose the war of engagement. You'll lose the war of leveraging people's genius. You will shut down so much in the process that you'll win these little battles. And to me, one of my biggest arguments as leaders is leadership is not about being right. It's in fact got nothing to do with being right. It's about facilitating people's thinking. It's about facilitating people's growth. And the moment you attach it to your need to be right. But I had a personal encounter with this, where when I first started out as a leadership training facilitator, this is a long time ago, and I got on one of my review forms, somebody wrote, "Ian's need to be right is getting in the way of being a great facilitator." And it was one of the most painful things I'd ever heard in my life. Devastating. But I tell you what, it changed the whole trajectory of my life. That my job is not to be the expert. My job is to facilitate the learning and growth of others. And when we can get away from our attachment to being right, we can create space for our people to think and to bring all of their greatness to the task that we have in front of us.
That's interesting. Yeah, when I start my workshops and facilitation sessions, I often say at the beginning, I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm not here to tell you what to say. All I'm doing is inviting you to think. And I'm not here to give you any answers. I'm here to give you loads of questions.
Exactly.
That's the purpose. And it really shocks people, because sometimes on my delegate feedback forms, they go, "Jo was really amazing, but she didn't give me any tangible answers." And it's like, but I gave you loads of questions. I gave you loads of thinking opportunities. So it's about teach the man to fish, and he'll feed himself for the rest of his life, rather than to give him a fish. It's
exactly.
It's empowering
exactly
people
that.
with thought, isn't it?
Yeah. And what I sometimes get pushback from leaders to say, well, if all I'm doing is asking questions and I'm not telling people what to do, am I still leading? And then I show them what it means to ask great questions. I show them what it means to listen well. And they suddenly realize this is harder work than just telling people what to do, but it's much more sustainable. It gives me the opportunity that one day I'll be able to take leave, take some vacation, because when I'm doing all the telling, it's all on me. But if I can get my people thinking, if I can be asking them the right questions, and even when it comes to sort of, semi sort of disciplinary type issues where somebody maybe has missed the mark or whatever, asking great questions puts more pressure on them than jumping in and saying, you must, which kind of puts the focus on the leader instead of having them do the introspection.
Yeah, I've certainly learned my marriage is stronger by adopting that approach. I don't not having to be right. I ask questions. I seek clarification. So if I have a different perspective, I try and phrase it as a question, and invite the conversation. And it frustrates the bejesus out of my wife, because she gets really frustrated that I won't agree with her sometimes, and I just come up with loads of questions. She's, "Can't you just agree with me for once?" I said, "Well, if I don't agree with you, what do you want me to do? Do you want me to just go, 'Yes, dear'?" Or she says, "Sometimes I'd like that. Yes, please." I go, "Okay." So now I say, is this a yes, dear question, or is this a let's have a discussion question? We're quite playful with it, but yeah, it is, and it's, if you have this stance where you challenge people with questions, and I don't mean aggressively challenge. I'm just saying, "Wow, that's interesting. I never thought of it that way. Tell me more." It allows you to get that person to even examine their own belief system.
Exactly.
That they've probably thought about superficially. And certainly where we got polarized debates around, let's just say, vaccinations, not vaccinations. That's a kind of a global thing, wasn't it? Asking someone why they think it's important not to be vaccinated, or what that means, or just tell me more. Tell me, oh, wow, it's fascinating. Tell me more. And you find out that some of the debates are wafer thin and there's no depth to them. They're just very superficial straw man type arguments or contradictory arguments. And it can be a good way of engaging with somebody because they end up walking off going, oh, I can't can't talk to you anyway. Yeah, well, okay. And I keep doing that with people, trying to find the answer. If you can explain this to me, I'd love you to turn me. I'd love you to persuade me that I'm wrong or have my view is different. And I actually ask people to challenge me on these things because I want to find out the answer that I've missed. And that's the challenge, isn't it?
I totally agree with you. And in this very polarized world, which seems to currently be becoming almost more polarized, we need the conversations, and both sides are seem to be unwilling. And the whole for me of consciousness is being conscious that I might be wrong, and that it's okay, and that I can be influenceable if we are not as leaders listening in a way where we could be influenced, then are we really listening? Or is it an insincere thing? So that comes back to an authenticity and a consciousness. And it's not to say that I'm suddenly wishy-washy about what I believe. It's simply saying that I understand that there's a spectrum, and it would be really useful for me to understand the bits that are different from my own, and that's going to make me a better leader.
And it's really hard to occupy the center ground or centrist ground because there's this polarization between one opinion at the edge and then the other opinion on the other edge, and both those two opinions are trying to drag you to their corner.
Yes.
So being in the center, almost people say, well, don't be wishy-washy, make a decision, come be influenced by me, because they want to draw people into their crowd. And I find that trying to have centrist type arguments with people, they're nervous because they don't necessarily have a view, or they're being shouted at by other people, and it's kind of uncomfortable to say, actually, I don't have an opinion, I don't know, I'm trying to find out more in a balanced way. But then as soon as you try and find out more, there's a momentum to suck you away from the center again.
Yes. What I'm finding more and more with many of these things is that we can get so focused on the two poles that maybe where we really want to be is not in the middle, but in a third position, a position that is something new, a new way of thinking, a new way of looking at some of these things. And I don't know that it's in the center, because the center just feels like a compromise sometimes. And it feels to me like, can we transcend? Can we get to another level in this argument? Is there another position we could take that is different from both of these positions?
Or recognizing that both positions have a perspective that is valid, and it's trying to work out, it's trying to rationalize those two valid perspectives. And I mean, the example I use often is going back to the anti-vax thing, is Novak Djokovic. And he hit the fiasco when he was in Australia and he was quarantined and they kicked him out, etc. It barred him from the Open. And I was determined not to like him because I'm vax, I'm pro-vax, and he was kind of anti. And I saw an interview with him, and the bit that gave me that, as you say, that third position was when he said, I want agency over my own body. I want to decide what I put into my body. And I went, yep, human right, agency. Yeah. Okay, I get it. I don't agree with your outcome, but I agree with your right for agency. And you can argue, yes, but you're doing stuff to other people. I don't care what else he's doing, but he has the right to agency. So I can take that, as you say, that third position, that aerial view, and go, okay, so how can we get agency to marry with society, et cetera, et cetera? So then we're having a different discussion, aren't we? It's not we're not angry with him. We're trying to work out how that can work.
Exactly. And that's getting to that other solution that doesn't require somebody to compromise their rights or their strong beliefs, but it allows them to still engage with the question and the issue and the implications of it.
Yeah. And they explained the rules, and he said, okay, I have agency. My decision is to leave. Goodbye. Thank you. He had a choice. So we weren't forcing him out. We said, well, this is the option. And I think by giving people those options, and the rules, if you like, of society or humanity that we have at this time. And
Yeah.
then you have a choice to opt in or opt out.
Yeah.
And there are consequences to both. But you have that choice.
Exactly, Joe. Yeah.
And you don't show any malice or towards the person. You just go, that's your choice. That's your choice.
And that to me again is conscious leadership. It's the idea of finding that key, that thing that you go, actually, I can align with that. I can align with that. And imagine in the workplace we've got so much diversity. How do you build a team where you may even find on the team you've got these two very polarizing different perspectives? And then our job as leaders is to transcend that and go, yes, I may have an opinion, but what is the truth of you that we can accept and we can understand? Oh, yeah, you have that right. And we welcome it.
Mm. Do you get any or a lot of pushback on the kind of the rejection of inclusion? The wokeism brand, it's all too woke. It's all too politically correct. Or you can't use humor anymore. Oh, here comes Joe. Here comes Ian. I've got to be careful what I say around them. Do you get a lot of that still with leadership?
Oh, totally. And I'll give you an example. I was working with a group of senior leaders in a financial institution in, I think it was November, December. And one of them actually just came in the next day and he was going, it sounds like what you're trying to promote is niceness, that we should be nicer people. But we've got some work to do. And we seem to be so focused on getting these things, all these other things in place that we've lost sight of we've got a pressure. We've got to deliver, and for me, it sparked perhaps the best conversation that we had in the 2 days we worked together, because what resulted was this is not either or; it's both and. We are not creating places of inclusion so that everybody can be happy and smiley and do nothing. We are creating places of inclusion to actually bring out the best in each person. And we talked about how we could do that, and specifically talking about the telling style of leadership versus the asking style, and saying, okay, how do we make sure that if we're doing an asking style of leadership, that it actually increases people's engagement towards the task? This is not, I'm asking because I'm going to be nice. I don't believe niceness has a place in leadership. Warmth, yes. Curiosity, yes. Inclusivity, humanity, yes. But niceness, my ultimate analogy for leadership, and people really don't like this, but my ultimate analogy for leadership is that leadership is love. What people immediately then assume is that I'm talking about being nice. No, it's loving to confront people. It's loving to talk about where they've missed a target, because to not talk about that to me is not an act, is the opposite of love. To just sort of smooth things over and to not ever confront issues, that to me is not love. And so this whole idea of, yes, we are talking about people being able to bring their whole selves to work in order to work, not in order to now not actually work. And that to me, once people get that whole argument, they suddenly realize that that is true leadership, is where people can bring their full selves, and we can achieve the task. We can achieve the goals.
And you can apply that to being a parent, can't you? Exactly that. You have love for your children, ultimate love for your children, but you're not always nice. You're a coach, or you're a mentor, you're a taskmaster or mistress. You're there to achieve the objective, which is a fantastic human being who can have a fantastic life and contribute to the world. And sometimes that needs focus and direction and coaching and correction, all those various things.
One of my favorite sayings about parenting, and my children are grown up, and I have a couple of grandchildren now. But one of my favorite sayings about parenting is it's not our job to raise children. It's our job to raise adults, people who can behave in the adult world. And that means, for example, as you said earlier, getting people to think, that our job is raising people who know how to think. And that's an adult response. People who know how to think, people who can ask the difficult questions. And that you do not get by being nice. You get that by getting people thinking, which is asking the very difficult questions.
Yeah. And I don't know about you, but I love someone to come up and challenge me with a question. You go, wow, I don't have an answer. No, I don't have an answer. Leave that one with me. I want to do some thinking on that. That's okay.
I totally agree. If we think we're supposed to have all the answers all the time, I think it actually communicates a lack of teachability. And I think that people really respect that kind of a response.
If you don't mind, let me ask you a bit about South Africa, because that's where you're based. That's where your home is. South Africa as a country has been on a huge journey over the last 20, 30, 40 years. You mentioned Nelson Mandela, and you swapped from white minority rule to black majority rule. And we've talked about a lot of things around forgiveness, acceptance, and moving on. It's been a tough, well, generation, I guess. What lessons are being learned as a society from this?
Well, I think that one of the lessons is that the real healing is at a much deeper level than the sort of smoothing over, the niceness thing. So we had our first fully democratic elections in '94, and in '95 we won the Rugby World Cup. And it was such a euphoric sort of moment of people of all colors dancing in the streets together, and the sense of unity. And we called it the Rainbow Nation. And there was this incredible, but many of the underlying issues had not yet been addressed. And where we've been going ever since has been getting to the real things. And I love it now when I see a lot of integration, and I walk into a restaurant and half the tables are mixed race, and this sort of thing. There's a lot of inclusivity and there's a lot of acceptance, but there's still extremism, of course, on both sides. But the sort of papering over and assuming that because we won the World Cup and we can dance and celebrate together, that all the problems are now gone, it's just so untrue. And we still see examples where there is exclusion. We still see examples where there's this automatic thinking that people are stuck in. And I'll give you a very simple example. I a few years ago was invited to give a talk in one of the traditionally very black areas, township areas. And literally the children were running up and touching my skin because they'd never actually seen a white person in person before. And it's just horrifying to realize that many years later, we still have so much separation. But and there's so many examples as well. Let me give you a very simple example. In most of our more European traditions, looking someone in the eye is a sign of respect. If somebody senior walks in and you stand up, that's a sign of respect. In many of the African traditions, it's the exact opposite. Looking someone in the eye is arrogant. You make yourself small in the presence of an important person. You don't stand in their presence, and so these sort of things of expecting, you can't expect everybody to move from one part to another part, and these people never do any moving. There's got to be a movement in both directions, and a beginning of an understanding, and that journey for us is not over. I remember having a conversation with somebody in the 90s when we had our first democratic movements and elections, and saying there are facets of where we are going as a country that's going to be multi-generational before it's going to be resolved. And the sort of thinking, because a lot of people think, oh, well, we had the apartheid government from 1948, until 94. But the reality is that even under The previous government, there was not fairness and inclusivity, and obviously under colonial rule there wasn't. It was the dominant forces, and that's not a British South Africa thing. There was the Dutch before, and if you look over Africa, the French, the Belgians, the Germans, there was a lot of that sort of thing, and the idea of being open to learn from each other, the idea to be asking the difficult questions is so important. The idea of looking and seeing what are the incredible strengths that a multicultural society can bring, and inclusivity that we can have, because there are facets, for example, in leadership, where some of the African traditional elements of leadership are so relevant, not just to better leadership in the world, but better leadership today, because they are more aligned with the Gen Z that we were talking about earlier on. There's some elements there where we suddenly realize, wow, but these traditional forms of leadership are suddenly relevant. We think of them as old, but they're actually new.
Yeah, I mean, leadership and humanity has been around for 50, 100,000 years, or whatever it is. Our current version of it was invented by white people in the Western world, wasn't it? And
exactly,
who says we're right? I mean, I would say there's a lot more depth and breadth of leadership styles from around the world than there is just in the, as you say, the colonial past.
Right.
We need to move away from.
Exactly. Exactly.
It's fascinating.
We need to listen to each other.
Yeah, I had the privilege to meet Lech Wałęsa in Poland when I was there back in the late 90s. And for those who don't know, Lech Wałęsa was the founder of Solidarity, who was the movement that some credit with bringing down the Berlin Wall and the fall of communism by standing up for the ship workers. And I remember him doing the talk he gave, saying that many people in Poland see him as an enemy. They see him as a destroyer, because you have to almost go backwards to go forwards. You have to unlearn. You have to remove the infrastructure. You have to remove all these constructs that exist in order to move forward. And I'm guessing that's the painful part that maybe your own nation is going through. You have to unlearn, and maybe that's the other barrier that leaders have. They have to unlearn their biases. They have to unlearn their methodology in order to embrace new ideas.
Yeah, it's so similar to the generational argument we were talking about earlier on, where we need to unlearn the ways of leading because they're not going to work with this new generation. And what can we learn from them? What can we learn from the diversity that is global? I have a client who's just finished a comprehensive program with us, and she's based in Malaysia. And she was astounded to realize some of the problems that we have in Africa, how similar they are in Malaysia. Where they also, went through things like, we have our Black economic empowerment, and people kind of go, oh, well, this is reverse racism and things like this. And she's talking about the dignity and the similar challenges that they faced in Malaysia, being independent and trying to kind of reverse a lot of the traditional thinking. And it's mindsets on both sides that need to shift. And we're just realizing how much we have in common, and some of the conversations that I've been having, because I have in my team, obviously people of color, and the conversations between her and my people of color, and going, we have the same experience, and what can we learn from each other, and how can we then move things forward?
That's fascinating. I think it just shows that sharing of experiences with people from different perspectives actually brings together and either reinforce some of our thoughts and changes. So, yeah, I think it is important. And I think one of the things I've learned over the last 4 or 5 years is more talking, more listening, and more listening mainly, but not being afraid. I mean, one of the reasons I founded this podcast, it gave me a good excuse to talk to people from all around the world and hear different perspectives. And as a host, I try and ask most of the questions and not give many of my opinions. So for me, it's an excellent way of seeking new perspectives on the world. So I do appreciate that.
Indeed.
Ian, we've been chatting for over an hour now, before we pressed the record button and in the green room, and it's been absolutely amazing talking to you and getting to know you better. And I can't wait for us to meet face to face somewhere else in the world, maybe Bali in a couple of years' time, or who knows, maybe I get a trip to South Africa one day and I'll come and knock on your door. So you told me you've got a book coming out sometime in 2023. Do you want to tell us a bit about that and how to get hold of you?
Yes, so it's actually my first book but there are 3 coming over the next 2 years. But the first one is called Lead Like Morpheus, The Genius of Conscious Leadership. And that one will be out sort of in the March, April timeframe here in 2023. And I'm very excited about that. And it's really bringing a lot.
I seem to have lost Ian. Hi, Ian. Welcome back. I thought we'd lost you for good there. You got sucked into the matrix or something. So welcome back. I think when you disappeared, we were talking, I just asked you about your book and how people can get hold of you. Do you want to just remind us?
Yes, indeed. So my book coming out in a few months' time is Lead Like Morpheus, The Genius of Conscious Leadership. And that's just bringing out all the theory of this inner journey of a leader resulting in external results and legacy that they can leave behind. So that's what the book is all about. And the best way for people to get hold of me is on LinkedIn. So in LinkedIn, it's simply / Ian Hatton, one word. Very easy to get hold of me that particular way. And then what you might find up there is there's a little QR code for doing a free assessment, a free conscious leadership assessment that we have, which is called the Leadership Egg, the Essence Growth Gap Assessment. And that's a free little assessment that people can do. But LinkedIn is the best way to get hold of me.
Fantastic. Many thanks, Ian. I'm sure everyone listening will agree there was much inspiration and stuff to ponder there, and also some challenging of perspective, which is fantastic. Mm-hmm. So a huge thank you to you, the listener, for tuning in, for listening this far. Please do subscribe if you're not already to keep updated on future episodes of the Inclusion Bites podcast. That's BITES. Tell your friends, tell your colleagues, share the love. I have a number of other exciting guests. Can they be more exciting? I had no idea. You have to find out. A number of other exciting guests lined up that I'm sure you'll be equally inspired by over the next few weeks and months. And of course, if you'd like to be a guest, I'd love to hear from you. As I would also welcome any comments, feedback, or suggestions. Just drop me an email to joe.lockwood@seechangehappen.co.uk. Let me know how we can improve, if that's possible. So finally, my name is Joanne Lockwood, and it has been an absolute pleasure to host this podcast for you today. Catch you next time. Bye.